CMEA meeting at Blanchester Church of Christ. Let Brent know if you want to attend, so he can RSVP. I'm just going to go, they're probably up there too, I'm just going to go through them anyways. The She Retreat at Butler Springs. What's that?
That was yesterday. So
Oh, I can't see it. 21st, I'm sorry. 25th. Yeah, those are both done. Never mind. The first one was done also. I didn't see the date on there. October 3rd, 12:30, Kids Fall Sunday School Party. I guess it'll be at the home of Jody and Roger. Lunch was served. And then November 6th, well, get with Jody if you have any questions about that, right? I'm not going to recall.
after church next Sunday.
All right, we're after church next Sunday. Is there an age school, just school kid age?
And it's outside unless it's raining, so dress accordingly.
Outside unless it's raining, so dress accordingly. Okay, and then November 6th, Bible Church of Christ will have their annual chili cook-off at the Salmon Home, and the Hickmans will once again win. Okay, all right. And any other announcements? Okay. Scripture reading today, Galatians 6, 6 through 10. Let him who has taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows into the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows of the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap, if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. And who's singing?
Good morning. We're going to open this morning with Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. our communion hymn, Here I Am to Worship. Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for love's sake he came forth. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. To see my sin upon the cross, I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. To worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful
Do not forget, Moses was about to be finished with his 120-year-long life. He had already received the news from God that he would not be accompanying the Israelites as they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. That's how Deuteronomy came about. Of its 34 chapters, more than 30 are the second telling of the law, which is what Deuteronomy means. Moses was preaching to the people over and over not to forget God, giving them reason upon reason upon reason upon reason to remember, remember, remember. Let's listen into Moses' message in chapter 8. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and revering him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and pools of water, with springs flowing in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing, a land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. We live in the United States of America. It's a good land. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain. God has blessed our nation. God has blessed us by giving us all we need and more. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. The words of the old leader Moses we hear again loud and clear. That's why Jesus gave his disciples this memorial, this simple plan, remembrance that we take each first day of the week, because we need help in weekly increments. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. Do this, Jesus said to his disciples, in remembrance of me. Luke 22:19 through 20. And he took bread, gave thanks and broke it, and he gave to them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Likewise, we also take the cup after supper, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. Let us pray. Lord, we take this bread. We remember that you are bread of life. You feed our souls, you nourish our hearts, and you give us substance to run the race before us. We smell the fragrance of your grace, your release afresh each day. We thank you with all of our hearts for the great price you paid when you were sacrificed on the cross for us. Yet just as the yeast has caused this bread to rise, you rose again, triumphed over death as Lord of our lords and King of kings forever, our beloved Savior. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Good morning. The elementary age kids can be dismissed to go downstairs to Children's Church. And we are going to be in Acts chapter 20, but it's going to take us a couple of minutes to get there. We've been going through Acts for several months now, doing one chapter a week. We certainly can't cover everything in a chapter, but we're hitting the highlights as we look at this awesome, incredible experience that the church had of going from this sort of battered group of survivors to fulfilling their mission of taking Jesus to the ends of the earth. Modern life has skewed our perspective on a lot of different things. I think even one of those things is animals. My kids are young enough that they still like to go to the zoo. And as far as places that I have to take the kids, the zoo is a kind of an entertaining place to go. And one of the things that strikes me as funny about the zoo is that if I was out in nature with some of these animals, if I saw them in their natural environment, I would be terrified, right? I think of the brown bears at the Columbus Zoo. They often wrestle back and forth with each other in this pit of water. Now, there's this plexiglass there so I can see that. I love it when they wrestle into being as close to them. And look how close they are. I can almost reach out and touch them. But if I wasn't have that protection, I'd think about it differently. We also will anthropomorphize animals in our entertainment, meaning we'll give them human features. Animals, they have feelings and they talk. And this is not just true of Bambi, who is an innocent little white-tailed deer in the woods. But we also say it's true of an elephant, Dumbo, who is in the zoo, but he's kind of disformed. But even like the Lion King, and the next slide should have the Lion King. Even this is a lion, apex predator, something that could eat us. But since it's a cartoon, it's cute. We think animals are great. During the pandemic, there's only but so much things, the lockdown specifically, when we were all stuck inside our house. Disney Plus was getting a good workout in the evenings at our home. And there's not only so much that you can watch together as a family. So I love watching National Geographic nature shows. Any of you watch those? Love it. Incredible footage of these animals hunting their prey and living life. It's unbelievable footage. I can't imagine how long it would take to get them. But I'm sitting on my couch watching it on a flat screen TV. If I'm out there, actually the photographer, it'd make you a little bit nervous. In fact, we have done so much to be interested in animals that a lot of people will seek to protect endangered species to bring their populations back to a sustainable level. And whether you may agree with what many environmentalists say about some extreme things, it's clear that in the Bible that it is mankind's responsibility to manage and care for creation and not destroy it. So I believe that preserving threatened species is a good thing. But as I say that, and we realize as our ability to observe animals, to protect them, and even turn them into cartoon characters, as we do that, these characters don't affect our lives in any practical way. But if I lived out west and I had a cattle ranch, then the wolf would not be something that I would find this charming thing on Disney Plus, would it? If I lived in Ohio 300 years ago, a mountain lion would not be this cool thing as I walked among the woods, would it? It'd be something that may eat me or my children as I travel. And if you think of back when Jesus was speaking to his disciples and when Paul was ministering and establishing early churches there, predatory animals are something that would threaten your livelihood. Because if you pay attention to how predators operate, they are not going for the strongest and the most difficult kill. They are seeking to get the easiest thing to catch, which is often the case domesticated livestock, rather than go after other wild animals. And this can be a metaphor for life. And Paul uses it as a metaphor in Acts chapter 20. We find ourselves at the end of his third missionary journey. And he is in the city called Miletus. And he has this understanding that this is the last time before I will be able to see some of these people that I've established relationships with on my missionary journey. So from Miletus, he calls the Ephesian elders to himself, and he gives them a farewell address in which he uses the language of wolves and sheep to describe what will go on the church in the future. But before we get to that, we need to lay a foundation. Christians are semi-frequently described as sheep. And God's people as sheep who need a shepherd goes all the way back to the Old Testament. We think of Psalm 23, the idea of protection, guidance, providing. It's very comforting. But if you think of a shepherd, then do you realize that we also have the very unflattering description of us as sheep? Helpless in many, many ways. They need a shepherd, and we will always need a shepherd, someone to guide us and someone protect us. Jesus described himself as the good shepherd in John chapter 10, verse 11. He says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. And the reason that there must be a shepherd is because there's danger. Jesus contrasts himself to the hired hand. In verses 12 and 13, he says, he who is a hired hand is not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, and he sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The reason that sheep need a shepherd is to protect them from certain threats. And if you ever watch anything about a wolf, and that's the imagery that Paul uses here, that Jesus uses here, but Paul will later use in the book of Acts, you realize that wolves are clever, tenacious, impressive animals. But then, as if with the false teachers, now that we'll talk about in just a minute, as in the first century, they are simply a threat that needs to be watched out for. They are bad. Because the wolves inside churches are after people. People who need a shepherd in Jesus. The book of Revelation talks about the care of Jesus for each of us and how he's both the lamb and the shepherd. Revelation 7:17 says, for the lamb in the midst of the throne will there be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Here is this incredibly intimate picture of who God is. A shepherd who wipes tears away from your eyes. Think about, who are the people who will wipe tears away from your eyes? When you're a kid, it's basically your mom and your dad. And there are some dads that would not wipe tears away from the eyes, would they? There was a kid that got hit in the face with a soccer ball yesterday on the other team in Dayton when we were playing. And his dad said to him, the kid is hurt. How many fingers do I have up? 3. Keep playing, all right? So maybe it's just, for some people, it's just your mom, or maybe it's your spouse. So it's a very small handful of people, that you let yourself be seen crying in front of, but within that, the people that would wipe the tears away from your eyes. And God is saying, I am that person, and the Lamb is such a great shepherd. Jesus is such a great shepherd and provides for our sins that he will be a part of this process as well. So Jesus is the shepherd, but earlier in Matthew 7:15, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Now, as we talk about false teachers and false teaching, we realize, first of all, the idea of it is contrary to the sensibilities of modern American life. Because what we want to do is basically think, well, if you live one way and I live another, And in ways that we don't agree, let's agree to disagree. The worst thing that you could ever do is to be disagreeable. Or to raise your hand and not agree with something that is not the truth. I remember when I was in my 20s, there was this whole, within church leadership, there was this whole thing about postmodernism and it eroding away at our very concept of truth. And it all seemed very theoretical to me then, but it doesn't now. Truth is something that people are accepting less and less as a real thing. We have perspectives and point of views. But when we talk about false teaching and people being ravenous wolves, it's built on this foundational idea. What you believe, particularly about God, and what you believe about God will impact what you believe about yourself and about other people. What you believe about God, yourself, and other people, that really matters. Because it is not a philosophical discussion about gravity. It's not a theory about dark matter or whatever else. It's not in the academic realm. What I believe about God, and thus myself and other people, that will impact the way I view the world and the choices I make. So we have to understand, so if that is the case, someone who has the correct view of God, thus themselves in the world, anything that runs contrary to that is very dangerous. Now, we understand that a wolf does not rely on just anything other than its wits. In fact, when Jesus said you need to be careful of wolves in what? Sheep's clothing. The last thing a wolf wants you to do is know that it's there. So they do everything they can to hide. I read a couple articles about how wolves hunt. In Minnesota, they don't have traditional prey that we think about west. So they will sit there and they will try to catch and eat beavers, which is a weird thing. But they have figured out that beavers can't see, but they can smell good, so they set up downwind from a beaver and sit there still till they pop out of their hole and then they get them. They rely on you not knowing they're there. It's stealth, and that's why there needs to be a shepherd who is wary and can protect us. The one thing I would say about false teaching is as serious as it is that we have to be careful that we don't lump every disagreement about the Bible into the same category. So part of my thoughts about this are informed by people I went to Bible college with. There were some very fiery characters in Bible college who, one of the things you should know about false teachers is there are parts of the Bible where it says false teachers are in danger of eternal damnation. They will, if they continue their false teaching, leading God's people astray, that will cost them their soul. And so some of these characters, EJ is one of them that I went to college with, he would like to describe people as false teachers whose souls are bound for eternal destruction. That was sort of one of his things that made him. And so when we're talking about key issues about who God is and how you're saved, I could understand where he's coming from. But there are times he's like some obscure understanding of the book of Revelation. He would start going like, so-and-so is a false teacher. And I knew someone he admired agreed with this person who said was a false teacher. And I said, well, does that mean so-and-so, who you admire, is in this eternal state? And he said, no, I don't mean it that way. So we don't want to say, hey, if we disagree about an interpretation of the Bible that is sort of in a non-essential character, we don't want to say, oh, that's false teaching, and go, oh, red alert. But we do want to understand that there are certain key issues because what we believe matters where a false teaching is extremely dangerous. And the other thing that I would say about this is there are certainly people, and we put it under the category of false teachers and those who mislead. There's certainly those who know that what they are teaching is false. It is no like it is a scam. When we describe someone as a snake oil salesman, they don't actually believe their oil is going to heal anyone, right? I don't think so anyway. They just want to sell it to make money. But false teaching is described in terms of being dangerous no matter what the intent is. So someone who is sincerely believing something that is wrong is dangerous as well. Before we move on, I had the question, are there wolves in Israel? And yes, there are. They're Arabian wolves. There's a picture of one. That is just something I had nagging in the back of my head I had to resolve before we move on. So here's what Paul says to the elders in Ephesus from Miletus in his farewell address. He says, be careful, pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to care for the church of God, which he had obtained with his own blood. I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And from among your own selves will rise men speaking twisted things. This is another way of Paul saying false teaching. To draw away disciples after them. Of all the things that Paul could have warned the elders in this church of, he chose to talk about people from within who want to gain a following and will twist words. Given everything going on in the church, it's almost surprising to me that this is what he chose. He could have said, you know what? When I leave, the same thing that happened to me is going to happen to you. There are people, Jewish people, who do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, so they believe that what I am teaching about Jesus and his resurrection is heresy. They believe that. And so they're not only going to disagree with you and harass you, they're going to follow you from town to town and your companions and incite violence against you. He did not warn them about that. And so far, Paul had been relatively under the radar of the Roman authorities, although he had been arrested once in Philippi when he drove a demon out of a slave girl who practiced divination. But as we continue in Acts, he runs into more and more legal problems and will spend more and more time in Roman custody. But he did not warn them about those external threats. He says, hey, when I am leaving, people from within who speak false things, who twist words, who teach falsehoods, that is the real danger that you have to watch out for. So if we talk about what's the real application of this, specifically, the church's elders should have a thorough understanding of God's word so that they can effectively combat any false teaching that might come into play. In addition to that, one of the qualifications for a deacon is that they understand the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience, which tells me that they would be able to sniff out and stop false teaching as well. But the truth of the matter is that anyone who wants to know God's word and knows it in its authentic form can understand when a falsehood is being perpetrated. And they have a solid understanding of their faith so that they can be aware of distortions of it, and they can protect not only themselves, but their church family. Now, this job of being aware of where false teaching will come from is a lot harder than it used to be, for a couple different reasons. I use the internet for my job almost every day, not just to send emails, but to research things. Any question that you can want to know. And I was asking Google some obscure questions this week. How big is a star? How far away is the sun? All this stuff. Any question that you want to know the answer to, you can find some sort of answer on Google or the internet, the World Wide Web. And so I often find myself saying, you know what, I have a question about this particular topic that relates to the Bible and spiritual life, and I will look it up, and guess what? When I Google it, I find lots and lots of great resources. And gathering this information takes me much less time than it would have 25 years ago when there weren't all these resources available. But then for every 2 or 3 resources that are great, guess what? There's something bad. And the danger in this, like, it's totally wrong. But the danger is not when something is just totally it's wrong and it's obvious. It's when it sounds right. This sounds right. And some people draw the conclusion is if it sounds right, it must be true. But not everything that sounds right is true. And one of the things that I think of when I stumble across some of these things is I wonder if someone in our church family who opened this and read it would be convinced of it. Because I can understand the way they outline their case and argue it, that it sounds about right, but it just isn't right. And how would someone kind of react to that? And so it's almost impossible to guard against all those dangers, and that is why it's important that while Jesus is the great shepherd and we have roles within our church family to help people avoid falsehood, we all have to be aware for ourselves. Within sort of the internet sort of thing is Facebook. The things that people will share and repost. Not just about whatever's they want to post about, but things specific about God and how he's moving in history and the correct interpretation of the Bible. The one issue that I particularly find a lot of things that I'm like, that's way off base is things about the return of Jesus and the Antichrist and whatever sort of tribulation situation people believe in. Because here's what I know appeals to us as people. Something exciting and sensational and salacious. Not, hey, we don't know when Jesus is going to return, so we have to be ready all the time. That's not going to get a lot of repost, is it? We don't know when Jesus is going to return. If I tell you, though, like, so-and-so is the Antichrist and Jesus will return, then that gets reposts and likes, doesn't it? And so just because something sounds true doesn't mean it is. And I want us to realize that what we believe matters, and falsehood is dangerous. Here's the fact of the matter when it comes to the internet and to Facebook. And it's easy to lose sight of this. Anyone can write anything on Facebook and the internet. It is easy to access it. I could write something wild and in the period of minutes have it on Facebook. If you gave me this afternoon, you could have a Facebook site that looked good, was appealing, and had reasoned arguments about, but was still completely wrong. And so people, especially when it comes to Jesus' return, have been trying to figure it out. The mark of the beast, the Antichrist, the second coming. People have been trying to figure this out for thousands and thousands of years, 2,000 years. Basically from the moment that Jesus ascended to heaven, people have been trying to figure out when he's going to return. And the only thing that people have had in common for the last 2,000 years is that they have consistently been wrong about what they've stated. And so we need to be aware of things that are convincing but not right when we access those resources. We need to understand motivation. These people wanted a following, but if you look at why they wanted a following, there are commentators who theorize that they were operating and influencing people within the church as an opportunity for financial gain. As Paul addresses issues in his church, He tells people to be wary of those who are leveraging the Christian faith as a way to generate wealth. So we need to think about the motivation of false teachers. I read an article that shows that this still happens today. Maybe only in Zimbabwe. But in Zimbabwe, there was a pastor of the House of Grace International Church named, his first name Sham, which should have been a giveaway. I just now noticed that. His first name was Sham. Sham Hungwe. He said, you know what? Some of the people in my congregation are struggling academically, some of the kids, and so I want to help them out. And so I'm going to offer them pens. And by offer them pens, I mean I will sell them pens. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot of money. These pens were selling between $1 and $20 for a pen. All right, so why would you buy a $20 pen from the pastor Sham in Zimbabwe? Because he would say, hey, if you are struggling in school, the pen that I will sell you will help you do better on your standardized tests. And if you buy a $1 pen, it'll help you a little. But guess what happens if you buy a $20 pen? Help you a lot, right? And so, I can't imagine that he was sincere in any way. You know what he looked at these pens and saw? He saw the green one, money. But the danger is, people sometimes want to believe a falsehood. If you told me, Brent, you could buy a $20 resource that would help your kids academically, it would actually help. Would I get it for them? Yeah, I'd buy it. But if he told me a magic pen, I would say no. So people said, one person said, my son is not very bright, and I think this will help him with the knowledge he's acquired and this pen from the man of God. I think it's going to work. So we have to be aware of when we're talking about false teaching, what people's motives are. And some people are to gather a following, often to generate money for themselves. Others are sincere, but are sincerely wrong. There are two main issues that Paul addressed in people's lives in terms of false teaching, if you look over the course of his letters and even his activity in Acts. The first was a group of people going around saying, if someone who is not born Jewish wants to become a Christian, they must first become a Jew, convert to Judaism, and often this simply meant the men needed to be circumcised and obey some other parts of the Old Testament law. Then they become a Christian. Two-step process instead of a one-step process. In Acts chapter 15, you'll remember that there was a council in Jerusalem that strikes that down, but it is clear that those who thought this way continue to teach this way. And here's the heart of that. The misconception that can affect the mind and the soul and how we view God. They believe that while God was forgiving and even loving, that there is still in some way where if we want God's favor, we have to follow the rules to be good. Now, we're not talking about good in the absolute sense. Jesus once asked someone who called him good teacher, why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. So we're not talking about it in the strictest sense, but when we describe someone as a good or a bad person, we sort of grade on the curve or we operate on the sliding scale. I remember that there was a Christian woman who was talking about her non-Christian husband, and she said, he's a good man, and she said, because he didn't beat me and because he provided for our children. And so we have different standards, because so if there's this scale of like evil to like the best person you ever know, the problem with defining each other as good or not good or describing ourselves that way is where on the scale do you fall? How do you describe what a good man is? And I think what you'd probably find is if wherever we strike that line, we're on the good side of it, right? Not many people describe themselves as bad people. And so most of us want to think of ourselves as good people because that makes us feel better, because on the other side of us, we are good people over here, so what's over there? Bad people. And if we're good and they're bad, we can feel better about ourselves because we're superior to them in some way. At least that's the way it operates in a lot of people's minds. And so if we're a good person, God should like us. This is flawed. If for no other reason, the fact that you can find a lot of people, because we like to look to our left, right? People worse than us. If I turn my head to the right, what else do I see? A lot of people that are a lot better than me on the sliding subjective moral scale. And so what's hard for us to let go of this idea is I've got to be a good person so that God will like me. The bottom line is this: the Christian faith, when it's practiced in its authentic form and is not warped by false teaching, has nothing to do with how good you are. Because when we describe good, it is a relative sliding scale. The standard that matters is, have I disobeyed my Creator God? Because when we have done that, even just once, we have sinned against an eternal and infinite being, which means the consequences of that one decision are eternal as well. And at that point, there's nothing that can do that I can make up for it. It's not like when we're dealing with our kids or someone else. It's not like, oh, I've messed up, I'll make for it. When it comes to our sin against God, there is no making up for it. That's not the way it works. So God is just, but He doesn't want us to bear the weight of our own sin. And that is why Jesus came, submitted to death on a cross, and rose from the dead, so that what we inherently want to try to earn, but can't, He can give us as a gift. Something free that we have to just accept and not try to buy. That sounds great to me. But I realize that often as human beings, we believe if something sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. And God's free offer of grace, because it's coming from a perfect being and we're used to living with fallen creatures, sounds too good to be true. There's also a sense in which it offends our sensibilities. Because if God forgives everyone based on His character, His mercy, and His grace, and on this grand sliding scale of good and bad people, if I'm over here and I look down to the very end, what does that mean? This person over here, the worst person you know, morally speaking, God says, I will freely offer you grace, embrace you as my child, if you just accept me in faith. And we look over there from what we think is our moral superiority and say, hey, that's not fair. I don't want to be in the same category as this person at all. And so it makes us uncomfortable. So we say, you know what, maybe we do need to try to earn stuff. And maybe it's not even something that we think about or verbalize, but it's always in the back of our mind, and it is falsehood. And the group of people that was teaching that then, Judaizers, reflect what people are still trying to do today. But it's extremely dangerous to try to earn God's favor. The best case scenario, if I said, you know what, God forgives me, but I'm still going to try to make Him like me through my good behavior, the absolute best case scenario in that situation, the very best, is that you'll spend the rest of your life feeling guilty and beating yourself up about sins that God has already forgiven you for. That is the very best. And I'm not even completely sure in my mind that I have it worked out. Like, what's the worst case scenario of trying to earn what God has freely given us? And so, if this sort of thought creeps into our mind, let's understand that it is something that has crept into the minds of Christians for nearly 2,000 years now, but it is based on a falsehood. The idea that we earn God's favor is something that Paul had to deal with then and that we still have to deal with now, although it's often more subtle and unspoken. The other false teaching that I'll mention that Paul dealt with in his letters is the exact opposite of that. And so some people would say, you know what? If this is true, and nothing that I can do earns God's favor, there's no amount of sin, no amount of rebellion that can change how much He loves me, which is true, and that grace is offered no matter how good or bad I am, which is true, then what should I, if it's completely free, if God has written me a blank check, what should I go do on the other side of this? Do whatever I want. Live it up. Let's book a flight to Las Vegas, Sin City. It doesn't make a difference because God loves me no matter what. He has to forgive me. That's His job. He's promised. And God can't break His promises. And remember, what we believe impacts what we do. And while people, I said this in a brazen way. No one's going to be like, God's forgiven me. He's stuck doing it, so I'm going to go do whatever I want. Like, no one says it that way. But it's more of a subtle underlying attitude. And the response to that, and I want to read 2 verses before we close, is if that is your response to the blood of Jesus, which was the cost of taking away your sin, then like you've missed the boat completely. You don't understand what just happened. The God of the universe took on human form, lived here for 30-some years, and then died a shameful death so that you can be offered salvation. That is not cheap. And for you to treat it as such shows that you don't even begin to understand it. Now, does that mean we're going to ever be sinless? No. Jesus says, John says, if I claim to be sinless, I make God out to be a liar. But my perspective about what it means to be saved by grace means that, like, I am so appreciative of that gift that I'm seeking to honor God, relying on His Spirit. Romans 6:1-2 says this. What shall we say then? Are we to continue to sin so that grace may abound? The more I sin, the more it makes grace better. It expands God's love and forgiveness. Is that right? Paul says, by no means. How can we who died to sin still live in it? In Titus chapter 2, starting in verse 11, he speaks even more directly to that. For the grace of God appeared, bringing salvation to all people. Then in verse 12, it begins to talk about what it does in our lives, when we've truly accepted it. Training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passion, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. One of the reasons is because if we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, we believe He's returning, and what it means to be prepared for His return has everything to do with being ready for that, is how we live. He says, verse 13, waiting for our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ, who gave Himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works. So when grace is really, when we understand it and it's working through us in the right way and we have truly bought in and trusted, it not only will not think we have a blank, not treating it like a blank check, but it will teach us to obey him, being prepared for us to return. Not only will we be avoiding sin, but we'll be excited about doing good things, zealous for good works. And so as we wrap up this morning, I think it's interesting, you look at the book of Acts, and between this week and last week, that we've jumped like several years. I think it was 4 or 5 years. And we're just getting like little bits and pieces of what was going on. We certainly don't have an exhaustive history of what was going on. And so whatever they choose to include is extremely important. And it's just, I find it interesting that this talk that Paul gave to what was probably only a handful of elders at church in Ephesus, of all the things he could have talked about, the thing he did choose to talk about was, hey, there are people who have bad intentions and who are going to try to twist what is right to gain a following after themselves. So this false teaching that's a wolf trying to destroy your sheep. So you need to be wary. It's going to kind of build on the foundation of what we believe about God matters. And so as we leave, what we can do is we can make sure that we know the Word of God as well as we can, that we have an understanding of the truth about God, so that when falsehood comes, we will be instantly able to recognize it, and not just recognize it for itself, but to know that there are people in my church family that I can also make these things clear to them, make them aware of it, so that we can protect it. We are a family that needs to look out for each other, because when the Word of God, the truth about Him, is distorted, it is dangerous. And Luke, as he was writing Acts, thought that was a fact fit to relay to us 2,000 or so, less than 2,000 years later, but about 2,000 years later on the other side of the world. So it's a warning that we can take earnestly. Because we have this great message that God redeems us through His Son and offers us grace freely, and when our lives are impacted by that grace and it works through us, then it changes who we are for the better. And it is a travesty when that gets manipulated or mutated in any way. You may be here and have never accepted God's grace, so we're going to offer an invitation right now, and it is a free gift offered by God as redemption for your sins. The way of accepting it is trust in Jesus, confession of Him as Lord of your life, and then becoming one with His death, burial, and resurrection in baptism. So let's stand and sing, and if you have that decision to make, come forward at any point while we sing this invitation hymn.
I still will follow. Lord, not go with
make sure you check your prayer list for what was added during the week. Doesn't look like anything was added this morning. Certainly in Sunday school, lots of people have illnesses, and the big one going around that is impacting us. So we want to continue to pray for that. And also thanks of protection for our church family. One of the members of our church family, Aders, you had a harrowing experience Friday, it sounds like. Wednesday. They had God was looking out for them on the road, and we're thankful for that, for sure. So let's close in prayer. Dear God, I thank you so much for all the ways that you bless us. I thank you for giving us the truth. Beautiful truth about who you are and what you're willing to do to spend eternity with us. I pray that we don't change in any way the greatness of your offer to us of grace in such a way that it makes us feel more comfortable. I pray that as we seek to understand who you are each day, and who we are in you, that you will give us the wisdom to know when someone has distorted that. Help us to have minds that are keen and wary of falsehood. We thank you so much for your Son and the great sacrifice he made for our sins. I thank you that he is able to heal those that we care about. I pray that he would. And I thank you for the ways that you've protected us and people in our church family this week. It's in your Son's name I pray. Amen.
Friend, I have a prayer on that. Gary Faye Birch, Faye tested positive for COVID, and Gary has symptoms. He was tested this week. Don't know if he's positive or not.
Yeah, so